It'd taken months to find the instructions. Every old bookstore and antique shop owner looked at me like I had 5 heads when I asked them about it. It seemed like I'd hit a dead end. Then one day, I was browsing a flea market and a vendor had something. Specifically, he had it. He said he wouldn't sell, that it was too dangerous. Unfortunately, his wife and children were also home when I paid him a visit. I had a large trunk, and they didn't live that far from the water. So although it took a lot longer than I'd planned, it was taken care of. Upon reading the actual instructions, it was far more extensive than I could have possibly imagined. More work had to be done. Lots more. I had to go international. I was sure to visit cities with large homeless populations. Enough money makes a lot of things acceptable. Even more for a nurse who didn't ask questions. I needed someone to confirm the girls were virgins. After 2 years and a fortune spent, I had everything I needed. Chalk for the circle and the symbols, candles for the invocation, and a knife for the offering. I rented a large room on a top floor and began the preparations. 2 hours later, and everything was in place. I'd had to remark the circle 2 or 3 times to make sure it was exactly right. I had no idea what would happen if it wasn't. The final step was the offering. I pulled out the knife and pressed it against my forearm. Just a little quick pain and then everything I've ever wanted. I counted down from 3 and then slashed open my arm. I gritted my teeth as I clenched and unclenched my fist over the circle to get as much blood inside it as possible. Every drop that fell disappeared as if it were being drank by the symbols. The room was then suddenly bathed in a sickly red light. A breeze blew, but none of the windows were open. I started to have such a headache. The gash I'd given myself on my arm began to stitch itself up as if by invisible hands. The breeze grew into a maelstrom. My head felt like it was going to split in 2. Then, it all stopped. But the light remained. A slit seemed to be cut into the floor at the center of the circle. Long, jagged, spindly fingers shot up through the gap and ripped the opening as wide as they could manage. Pulling itself up out of the tear in the floor, a shape appeared. The lights came back on and I could finally see what had arrived. It was thin. It looked like most of its weight was carried in its hands and legs. It appeared to have an inverted joint that separated its legs into 2 segments, giving it a bird-like quality. It seemed to retract and contract its body as it moved to adjust itself. It was as tall as a small child and had what looked like the charred remains of wings jutting out of its back. Its face was covered in small, spiny protrusions. Each of its eyes had what looked like 3 different pupils. It just stood there, staring at me. Are you my master?" I said, breaking the silence. Its response was almost instantaneous.
"Lucifer? Me? Oh, goodness me, no. My name's Keith, and I'll be taking care of you tonight."
"Your name is Keith?"
"Well, I guess you caught me there."
Its tongue slithered around its face as it spoke.
"Keith is not my given name. I just go by that to make it easier to communicate."
"Well then, what's your real name?"
"Oh, my real name, if spoken to you, would collapse your mind and you'd have internal bleeding. So we're gonna steer clear of that for now, okay?"
"Why isn't Satan here? I spent so much time. Did everything the scripts told me to."
"Well, as you can probably imagine, the Lord and Master of the Festering Darkness is a busy, busy bee, and he can't be present for every Tom, Dick, and Harry who gets their hands on a summoning ritual."
Keith saw the look on my face and tried to backpedal.
"But that's not to say he doesn't appreciate all the time and effort and torture it took to perform the sacrament. I mean, it's not like those virgins were gonna decapitate themselves, now were they?
Still trying to come to terms with the realization that Satan wasn't coming, I tried to focus on the matter at hand. But I can still bargain with you, right? Keith made the closest approximation to a smile, and my nose started to bleed.
Of course you can. What would you like?
Immortality. Power. I want to bend people's will to mine. I want the world to be my playground. I want...
Whoa, okay, that's a lot. But in exchange for your immortal soul, the sky is not the limit. You can get the sky, and more.
I let out a sigh of relief and smiled, wiping away the blood from my face. Finally, after years of research, the fortune spent and the sacrifices made, I was finally at the end. Keith held out his hand.
Now, all I need is a drop of blood and we're off to the races.
I hesitated. What about all the blood I gave to summon you here?
Oh, that's just a formality. You don't actually need it for the summoning ritual.
Then why did my cut get stitched up?
Well, we can't have you die. At least not until we have a binding contract. But once we do, you can go jump into a wood chipper if you like.
I held out my arm. Keith grabbed my fist and pried open my fingers. His grip felt like I had stuck a fork in a socket with one hand and lit myself on fire with the other. His pointer claw extended out and broke my skin, drawing blood. I barely felt it. His long tongue started to snake its way out of his mouth and lick the blood right off my finger. His numerous eyes rolled back, and a venomous yellow and green light started to bleed off of him in waves. Suddenly, the room began to shake, and Keith started screaming. He was lifted off the ground and started violently contorting himself. Then small sparks of lightning started to arc off of his claws and all over the room. I flipped over a desk and jumped behind it, waiting for everything to calm down. Finally, I poked my head out from behind the overturned desk. There Keith was, standing in the center of the room. He had a look on his face. Even with his inhuman appearance, a very human-like emotion was painted on his face for all the world to see. Embarrassment. I asked him, "So, what's next?"
Well, I may have to walk back some statements I made earlier.
Like what?
Like what you're eligible for.
Eligible? I'm signing over my immortal soul. What could I not be eligible for?
Well, in a rip the band-aid off quick effort of communication, your soul is terrible and worth nothing.
What?
Yeah, I'm so sorry, but it's just not the caliber we usually look for in our contracts.
So, I'm too evil to make a...
Oh, no. That would count in your favor, if that were the case. You're just a very boring person.
But all those terrible things I did to get here, they weren't boring.
No, but we're weighing a few riveting and deplorable years of acts versus an entire lifetime of bleh. It doesn't balance out.
Thinking there must be some way around this, I tried a different angle. Well, what can I get? Keith stroked his chin with his claw, still wet with blood.
How does a timeshare in Miami Beach sound?
I'm giving you my soul, my one and only immortal soul, and all I'm getting in return is a free timeshare in Florida?
Well, it's not free.
What?
Oh, you'd still be paying for it. I could just get you a really good deal.
Great.
If you pass the credit check.
Okay, that's it! I rushed to the chalk circle and started to furiously wipe away the runes and markings. Keith's form started to flicker.
If you're not satisfied with the terms of the contract, then you could have simply told me. No need to be impolite. I'll just see myself out.
And with that, a slit was cut once more in the floor. A flurry of massive, slimy tentacles spilled out of the opening. A very bored-looking Keith was enveloped in them, and yanked back through the portal. I was left alone in my room, left to contemplate the years of effort in pursuit of my dreams amounting to nothing. But in that moment, something came to mind. Something almost like salvation. The cop stood over the body. "So what's the story here, Joe?" one said to the other. "Well, this guy was up on the 3rd floor. He was armed with a hostage. We had snipers on the roof in case things started to go south." "And then?" the first cop said, eyeing the body with a quizzical look on his face. "He disappears with the hostage off the balcony back into the building for about 10 minutes. And then this?" "Yep, and then this." The two cops looked down at the body. It was wearing a chicken suit that was riddled with scorch marks. Its hands were also missing, and the crumpled remains of a unicycle lay beside it. A large trampoline was situated about 100 yards from the flattened, burned remains. "So what was the plan, you think?" Probably get some attention with the hostage to start, wave the gun around, look like he means business. Then strap on the chicken suit, light the flares, get on the unicycle, and jump. Once he hits the trampoline, it bounces him over the railing onto the speedboat, and off he goes. At least that was the plan? Yep. Flares and dynamite look pretty similar under the right circumstances. Blast blew his hands off. Made him miss the trampoline, but luckily the cement was there to catch him. No ransom, no demands? Nope. Any last words? Yeah, actually, let me see. I wrote them down. The officer flipped through his notebook. Right before time of death, perpetrator was heard saying, "How's that for boring, Keith?" Yeah, I mean, it's gotta be a joke, right? This is like paint by numbers crazy. If there's one thing I know working Miami Beach the past 15 years, is that this is the most boring thing I've ever seen.